Also watching this on CBS News 24/7 moments ago, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt answering the questions that you want to get answers to, including on that prisoner swap with Russia. And of course, that phone call between President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So let's go ahead and listen in to a little bit of that.
As you know, this morning, the president spoke to President Putin of Russia. They spoke at length, and the president released a statement following that conversation in great detail. I can also confirm that the president just recently got off the phone with President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. His truth is as follows. I just spoke to President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. The conversation went very well. He, like President Putin, wants to make peace. We discussed a variety of topics having to do with the war, but mostly the meeting that is being set up on Friday in Munich, where Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will lead the delegation. I am hopeful that the results of that meeting will be positive. It is time to stop this ridiculous war where there has been massive and totally unnecessary death and destruction. God bless the people of Russia and Ukraine. I myself just spoke to the president about these calls, and he told me to tell all of you they were very good calls, they were very positive, and the administration is wholeheartedly committed to a peace deal to end once and for all the Russia-Ukraine war.
So CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro, let's break this down, forecasting into a meeting that's about to happen with Vice President J.D. Vance. Who else is going to be in that meeting?
We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be in that meeting, and generally Rubio is part of a team that Trump posted on Truth Social that will help lead these negotiations with Russia and Ukraine to end that war, including Rubio. CIA Director John Ratcliffe will be there, NSA Director Mike Waltz, and Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff, who we have already seen be instrumental when it comes to the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and he had a pretty significant role in the release of Mark Fogel just last night. But according to Caroline and President Trump, he has had conversations with both leaders and really signaled, at least in his conversation with Putin, that this negotiation will get started. And I think one thing that's important to point out is some of Trump's past comments when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, such as him saying that the U.S. should receive some sort of return for the aid it has given Ukraine, and as well as Trump saying that parts of Ukraine could be annexed into Russia. I think that will really illuminate where these negotiations start, but the White House says that these conversations today with the two leaders were positive and good.
All right, Aaron, we also want to play for our viewers something that Caroline Leavitt had to say about Elon Musk's Doge, or Department of Government Efficiency. So let's talk about that after we let our viewers hear that.
I would love for Elon Musk to come to the briefing room. That's why we had him go to the Oval Office yesterday, where I think he provided great answers. He was speaking in layman's terms, speaking common sense to all of you in the media, but also to Americans at home. But I would say especially to all of you in the media, because I think it's a real fallacy that there's this alleged lack of transparency when it comes to Doge. President Trump and Elon Musk have been incredibly transparent on what Doge is doing. There is an X account with the Doge handle. They are tweeting out what they are doing on a daily basis. They have a website where they are posting the receipts of the contracts that they are reviewing and the payments that they have stopped from going out the door. The secretaries of our departments have stopped from going out the door. And I would also say that before it was Elon Musk making our government efficient and accountable, it was some unnamed bureaucrat that none of you knew. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. He's also now one of the most highly scrutinized men in the world alongside President Trump because of what he's doing and the access that he is allowing. So there's great transparency. As for the actual receipts, we are happy to provide them. And
all right, so that is what she had to say about Doge and some of the criticisms there. Elon Musk used the term, speaking to transparency, saying that he expects, quote, a daily proctology exam. That's how layman's term that he used. But I want to ask you about what Democrats are having to say relative to when they're talking about the man who is in charge of the Federal Reserve. Is there the transparency that Elon Musk is promising to the American people? I see a lot of posts on X, but when you go to that website, you don't see the volume of things that we're told are on that website.
And that seems to be what Caroline was trying to address in part by pulling up receipts in her words, of these contracts that have been terminated as part of Doge's efforts. But you're right. I mean, some of the transparency questions are definitely still there, just especially with all the federal employees that have been impacted. Those that CBS News have talked to have described a sense of confusion regarding what's going to happen next with their agency, looking at USAID as well as the CFPB Bureau. So certainly in that aspect, not as much transparency. And it was striking, too, when Elon Musk was in the Oval Office yesterday, as he brought up these examples, how he was kind of combining, disagreements when it comes to government waste and saying that there are, quote, fraudsters out there gaming the system for their own personal gain. Those are also things that we have not seen evidence of yet, but are asking the White House for.
How much we know about who is working with Elon Musk, the staffing, the people who are having access to these high-level records? What do we know about the people that Elon Musk has entrusted with going through all of these records that you and I, as members of the American public, could not easily access?
We know it's a mix of former Trump officials as well as a lot of younger, 20s, around that age, engineers that have had some connections to Musk's companies. We know that one of them actually had access to not only reading information in the Department of Treasury, but according to an affidavit, at one point he had access to edit that information. That permission was, revoked from him. But certainly, as his team has been working in offices and basements of these agencies, we've heard reports just from staffers that they tend to be on the younger side, but certainly people that don't necessarily have a breadth of experience working in the government and the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and I know Caroline Levitt is trying to get us to look at those receipts. That is a valid conversation to have, but how those receipts are being acquired is also an important conversation. Aaron, it's nice to talk to you today on CBS News 24/7 and all days.